And thanks to everyone for coming today. I'm Paul Pangaro. I'm president of the American Society for Cybernetics, an international organization that I hope, if you're not familiar with, you will explore our website, which I can offer in the chat. We've been around since the 1960s, and we're anxious to serve new communities as well as the communities that have been members of the society for some time. Please have a look at the site. You'll find our history there. You'll find prior sessions in this very series, in the speaker series of the last years. And we'd love to hear from you if you have thoughts about what we do. If you'd like to join, please get in touch. And we look forward to continuing the relationship and future conversations here. With that, I'll introduce our Vice President, Claudia Westermann, who's also involved in today's presentation to carry it through. Claudia.
Thank you, Paul. I am very happy to welcome you to today's session entitled Pluriversal Ecologies, Empathy, Intersubjectivity, and More Than Human Design, which was largely designed by Annan. So Paul said it already, I'm currently the Vice President of the American Society for Cybernetics. I have a background in art and architecture and have been based in China for the past 12 years. And I'm very happy to welcome for today's session Annan Zuo, who was a student of mine in the past, some years ago. And he's currently based in London. He is a more than human researcher and architectural designer. He holds an MPhil in architecture and urban design from Cambridge University and currently works at Foster's and Partner in London. And he will very soon, in autumn, he will begin a PhD in geography and the environment at the University of Oxford. Annan's design work has been featured at international and cross-disciplinary exhibitions. He's the recipient of the 2024 Biodesign Challenge Grant Prize and was nominated for both the RIBA bronze and silver medals. The first one was, I guess, my nomination. So Frederick is also here with us today. Frederick Steier, very happy to welcome you today for this session. I'm really looking forward to this. Frederick Steier is professor in the School of Leadership Studies at Fielding Graduate University and emeritus at the University of South Florida, where he directed interdisciplinary studies programs. His work centers on systemic approaches to social and ecological systems with a focus on whole systems design and multi-level learning. He's worked on Gregory Bateson and Umberto Maturana, edited some works. I jumped that one. He has led participatory research in diverse settings, including NASA and MOSI. And in 2019, he received the Norbert Wiener Award from the American Society for Cybernetics. And in 1985, he was named King Olaf V Fellow by the American Scandinavian Foundation. So these are the introductions. I'm really looking forward to Annan taking now over. For around half an hour, he will introduce his work and his questions.
Thank you, Claudia. And you mentioned that I was a student of yours back in 2019, but I feel like I've always been a student of yours since that moment, and it's been many years. And our journey through not only architecture but also cybernetics and systematic design has always been like a very foundational part of my life. And yeah, when I was invited to do this talk, I was feeling like, oh, it's like my imposter syndrome just reached the highest points in my life. I feel like I've got like, compared with the previous speakers in the session, I've got like nothing like in my pockets to show. But then after talks with Claudia and Fred, they encouraged me to do just simply introduce my own journey, like my architectural designer research and how my path has been shaped by cybernetics and also by this idea of modern human design. And so, so we together sort of designed this session to be more like a sharing session and then also like a question session. For me, I definitely have more questions than stuff to show. So hopefully we'll also be able to engage the audience to join our discussion on the topic of empathy, intersubjectivity, and modern human design. And now you're probably wondering why I'm showing you a picture of an onions in the microscope. So I remember this is probably the first moment in my life when I realized something that's so different. Like I remember it's in my high school biology class, and we were looking at those cells of an onion, and I was asking my teacher at the time, if every cell is like one little life, then how can it the onion, which is a larger life, be formed by these little lives, and how can you define life in this kind of multi-level structure? And of course, at that point, I didn't know what it means. This concepts such as like structural coupling or like automatic systems, or of course I didn't know what cybernetics was. I feel like at the moment this kind of question sort of opened my like a secret portal in my life. And although I started doing architecture in uni, it's still something that I always come back to. And even in architecture, I was still trying to ask the questions of life through the pathway of design and research. And so with Claudia, we sort of developed, it's like my final year undergrad project. It's like an architectural project. The starting point is actually quite simple. So I was asking the question, is architecture inevitably anthropocentric? Since like, you know, most buildings, most built environments that we see every day is designed for humans, and even the concepts such as natural reserves or the green walls, this kind of terminologies, they still sort of describe the systems that work for humans. So at that time, I was just curious to flip this idea of architecture, and then was trying to test if it's actually able to design architecture that's not anthropocentric, but serving the needs of modern humans. And so we started this project, and it's based in Shanghai. And the idea is to sort of develop the idea of the human community and develop into like this so-called third level community. It's a concept by Aldo Leopold. And through my project, I was trying to test if it's actually able to include modern human entities such as animals, plants, and microbes, and even the inorganic environments into the architectural systems. And so I started by looking into the needs and lifestyles of different animals living in the site and trying to coordinate the human activities and spaces according to the needs of those animals. And it's actually quite a fulfilling process. Like by learning the processes, it opened up so much possibilities, also in terms of the creation of an architecture. So I started designing the spaces based on the typologies of the animals, such as room birds and foxes, and then salamanders, and also the frogs. And based on these typologies that these animals would possibly be able to live in, it can also open up such a gigantic grammar for the humans in terms of the architectural language. But then the problem sort of naturally just appeared. So like it's like humans and animals, it's like in a fairy tale world, we can live together, but in real life, there's always like noise and pollution and disturbance. And obviously most humans wouldn't want to live so close to animals. And most animals would also not want to live with humans. So since co-living is somehow not always desirable for neither human or animals, how can we still find a balance, and how do we still create a built environment for us all? And so I then sort of shifted this idea to a buffer zone. So like there should probably be a buffer zone in between the place that we live, and then the leading question was created: if direct coexistence is impractical, how can we support modern human lives from like respectable distance? Like what's the right distance that humans and animals should achieve so that we can all live in the same environment? And that created sort of the starting point for my master's project at Cambridge. And so it's called Recovering a Modern Human Third Landscape in Kyoto. So the starting point was exactly the ending point of the previous project. It's the idea of developing a buffer zone. What if we can return, like if building a new structure for humans and animals is so difficult, what if we just simply return abandoned human space to nature? Like instead of putting a shell in the human realm and entirely separate the human and animal space, how about transforming human spaces that are not needed anymore and return it to the natural landscape? And so with this concept, the project is about transforming abandoned houses into shelters for deer in Kyoto, and also to explore the idea of care as a relational and situated ethic. And so this project is like a 4-stage project, and from left to right, it's like abandoned buildings. And then the first step is reintegrate them to serve the needs for the humans who still live there. And once the humans move out because of population shrinkage that's happening in Japan, and then it's possible to transform those spaces into ecological workshops and then gradually into monuments for human, while also serving as shelters for animals such as deer. And so really this is like scheme to return the human occupied space back to the natural landscape, both in terms of the materials and then the space occupied. But then again, after the project, I was involved in the RSD 12. There was like scheme that's called generational collaboration scheme, which I was really lucky to be able to work with Fred. And we developed a presentation based on this project, and also posing even more questions. And so it's sort of really ideal to create this third landscape where both humans and modern human entities can thrive. But then with this creation of the third landscape, it also means so much more that's sort of unpredictable and constantly mutating elements. And so, for example, in the landscape that was working with, the Satoyama landscape in Japan, there's such a complex ecosystem. And when we try to open up the possibility to design for all those elements in the ecosystem, how can we even be able to grasp all the needs and all the agency of and animals and plants and landscapes in this system? And also, just to put it very simply, how do you know what they want, and if we cannot communicate with them? And also, how do you know their agency? Like how do we design for their unexpected needs and the unexpressed and ununderstandable needs? And so the new question was created: how can we design with care for non-humans if we do not know what they want? Can we truly account for their agency in design? And so then this question inspired me to further develop this idea of modern human design. And so I was also lucky to be able to be part of the ASC 60 meeting last year, and where I did a presentation on this concept in active biosemiotic domain, and I was inspired by Susan Stewart's her philosophy called kinesthesia, which is the bodily engagements and movements between humans and non-humans, which is the origin of empathy. And through this kind of bodily connection, it's sort of possible to communicate and engage with the agency of more than human entities. And so the starting point for this presentation is to design for non-humans. We may need to find ways to communicate, to empathize with them. But then human sensory limitations, the human Umwelt, often lead us to believe that our perceptual existence and experiments encompasses all that is meaningful, and that restricts our understanding of the shared realities of more than human entities. And so building on Maturana and Valada's human-centered consensual domain and seeking to expand it into a biosemiotic domain that includes all living organisms, symbiotic interactions, and trying to integrate the concept in kinesthesia that highlights effective co-agency. I was trying to construct this notion of inactive biosemiotic domain, and that's a concept that seeks to transcend the linguistic barriers between humans and non-human animals by emphasizing the sort of effective and reciprocal dynamics and mutual influence. And so this inactive biosemiotic domain would be able to provide a robust framework to understand cross-species communication. But another problem is still sort of existent. There's always this kind of persistent challenge of overcoming this anthropocentric bias. Since everything is initiated by us humans, how can you justify this new domain? And but then my conclusion at that point was that despite this kind of theoretical advancements like biosemiotic enactivism and kinesthesia, our attempts to engage with non-human experience is sort of always shaped by human cognition, but this kind of shared affective experiences still can bridge this gap and enabling like a co-constructed domain where meanings are fluid and collectively shaped across species. And so in the conference, we also did the test of this concept. So like my session was taking place at the Smithsonian National Zoology Park. And it was like an integration of academic presentation and then participatory sound simulations. So throughout the event, we invited the participants to capture the acoustic Umwelts of themselves and their living and intimate environments using their own smartphones. So it's so they would be invited to record the sounds that they found interesting on site in the zoo. And these sound samples were sort of subsequently collected, edited, and then rebroadcasted to the zoo back through the online channel in the live way. And then this kind of sounds would be woven into like a collective acoustic tapestry. And then it would be a continuous auditory loop that enhances the collective Umwelt. That's like sort of a really nice experiment. But then the new question was sort of proposed through this project. So what is the role of the human subjectivity in understanding the intersubjective relations? Then in this experiment, for example, when the audience and then the participants are collecting the sound samples, what's the role of their own likes and what's the role of their subjectivity when they're trying to collect the samples, and how does then the role of the subjectivity play in terms of understanding this kind of intersubjective and collected Umwelt. And so with that, and also with my previous projects, I sort of drafted my proposal for my PhD, which was also quite lucky to be able to go through all the application process, and then hopefully starting from this October, I would be able to work on this, and hopefully like in a year or 3 years, I'll be able to sort of have like a start on this project and have more answers or more questions. And so my PhD research proposal is called Towards an Empathetic Landscape, a post-phenomenological exploration of intersubjectivity and multispecies justice in the Satoyama landscape. So the starting point is again the ending point of the previous project. Since human cognition and sensitivity truly perceive and meaningfully engage with non-human worlds, and if they can do so, to what extent are they necessary or even desirable? And so in this project, I will adopt a post-phenomenological framework. And this research will investigate the role of empathy in cultivating more than humans intersubjectivity and advancing multi-species justice within the Satoyama landscape, which is decaying. And so this project will have like this threefold implications. And on the philosophical or theoretical side, I'm still trying to understand what subjectivity means, and this kind of the role of human subjectivity in assessing and interpreting modern human life worlds. And also in a more practical sense, I would need to understand the basis of the Satoyama landscape and the interconnected social ecological dynamics and the shared vulnerabilities. And then also on a more sort of policy side or implications side, I will also try to propose empathy-based policy that would sort of inspire management alternatives to recover this decaying landscape. And so this project would hopefully be moving from this speculative concepts of subjectivity to the community-based design and policy, so that will have like real world implications, and also hopefully you will be grounded within tradition and sensation and somatic knowledge of the local communities. And then the core question is, how can we cultivate landscapes of co-presence and justice where empathy would guide us towards not only comprehension, but also relational responsibility? I think that's the core implication of empathy. So it's not only something that's just about comprehending other species, but also about taking responsibilities to protect them and care for them. And yeah, that's sort of my personal journey through all these concepts, and hopefully it didn't confuse you. And yeah, with that, I would invite Claudia to introduce her to give introduction.
Thank you, Annan. So hopefully I managed to do this now with the share screen. Okay, so I have 3 or 4 minutes, and I'm going to go very quickly through some projects, just to maybe primarily to raise a question whether the idea of landscape, or whether there couldn't be a widening of how we look at things. I call it living in landscapes of uncertainty. And I show 2 works I developed with colleagues in the past years. This is Bacon Village in Fujian province In the year 1980, there were around 40 people living in the year 1980, there were around 1,000 people living in this village. Today, around 40. And this is within the context of a rural revitalization project and festival. The project seeks foreseeing response to the challenges facing the village community with a conversational framework that is intended to speak to inhabitants and visitors of all ages. For some, it is a meeting place, for others, a playground, and for others still, it is an opportunity to contemplate the landscape. It is window and frame, it is view onto and into the landscape. The project's seeds transcend a tangible materiality into instruments for the composition of landscape sceneries. And we see here the children on the opening day. These seeds do not act like standard seeds. They initiate play, playful conversation for visitors of all ages. Another installation, Symphony of the Everyday, was installed last
Claudia,
year.
sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt, but we are not seeing your images in good resolution.
Really?
Yeah, I know this. Maybe if you stop your camera or something, I don't.
Wait a minute. Let
Yeah.
me stop my camera.
Yeah,
Let me try.
I don't know if it's internet connection, but it seems
Let
to
me
be to everyone.
Yeah, it went, Claudia, it went, now it's blurry again. Just a second ago, you hit a button and it got clear. So I don't know. Yeah.
Let me try. Is it better now?
No, it's not the camera then.
Let me try something else. Stop share. Anyway, I can also let me try this just regularly. Is it better now?
No.
Okay, one moment, I shift to the other connection. So what I want to say is that this other installation is it's in a different province, but let me try this. Sorry for that. Is it not better now?
Very
I
slight.
think, yeah.
I switched to the other connection. Okay, a small courtyard in rural China, Yunnan province, around which 4 families live. There are many things in this courtyard. Things tell stories of relations, of craft and inventiveness, of old and new materials, and of memories. Haiyan village is located at Dian Lake. In the past, the village's main activity was fishing, but the lake today is heavily polluted. The village's economy now largely depends on tourism. For 1 hour per day, the sunset draws the attention of large crowds of visitors. The only attraction the village has, we copy it and place it in the entrance to our courtyard, prolonging the sunset hours to full days. And the things we found became soundings. The installation frames the sonic existence of materials and things in an image that becomes symphony when people visiting the courtyard triggers small piano mechanics. Visitors replay the things that once were part of the courtyard house's life. The newly sounding things are part of a contemporary symphony that is not quite the everyday that they had been part of. And yet it is an everyday that had remained a possibility. And I'm ending with a poem. The two-headed calf. Tomorrow when the farm boys find this freak of nature, they will wrap his body in newspaper and carry him to the museum. But tonight he is alive and in the north field with his mother. It is a perfect summer evening, the moon rising over the orchard, the wind in the grass. And as he stares into the sky, there are twice as many stars as usual. And with this, I'm at the end. And I hand over to Fred.
Yeah, thanks so much, Claudia, and thank you, Annan and Paul and Matthias for helping set this up. So what I would like to do is just to offer some questions that are, I guess, in the form of provocations, but just to give a little bit of context, the experiences that I'm drawing on for this are work that I had done over the last 20 years or so as, oddly enough, a scientist in residence at the Museum of Science and Industry. That's the MOSI that Claudia mentioned in the introduction, where the goal was really, well, among many things. I mean, it was kind of funny that I was a scientist in residence because I'm not a scientist and I also was not in residence. So, but the idea was to think about how you design exhibits that invite youth and their families to experience the world of others and to think about this in terms of how they design their own lives. So, for example, a butterfly garden invited ways of thinking about what is the world of a butterfly and how that might be experienced by a 5-year-old child or a parent with a 5-year-old child. And what's important for me about what Annan and Claudia are doing is it also opens up new opportunities and new problems. The opportunities are, and this is drawing directly on what both Annan and Claudia are saying, is that we move from thinking about landscapes to thinking about soundscapes, to thinking about touchscapes, to thinking about smellscapes, and to think about the world as experienced through different senses. But at the same time, and this is where the value of empathy and also some of the challenges of how we think about empathy, which Annan will talk about more, becomes so important. Because when we talk about being empathic, whether it's with a beaver, trying to figure out how does a beaver build a pond, or an otter playing, or a tree, because many of you in the chat have made the point of non-human includes non-animal also. We're experiencing that empathic behavior through the lens, I'm using a visual metaphor, of what we have. And it's based on prejudices that our own language brings to that experience. So how do we begin to see the empathy? And this is something that's so key for what Annan is doing for me. How do we begin to see the empathic world of even the notion of the Umwelt in a more of a recursive process in terms of recognizing what are the assumptions that we bring to our own observing, our observing, for example. And what does this mean when we try to think about not the universe, but a pluriverse, the many verses, the many turnings that we might be interacting with other creatures, but to really recognize the importance of empathy, but also some of the very challenges in doing this. And how this shows up in terms of design and what are some of the consequences of that? So one of the things that shows up for me is really recognizing this as multisensory. And there's this wonderful book from a few years ago, I can put it in the chat. I'm assuming everyone here has read it, right? By Ed Young, called An Immense World. And what Ed Young does in this book is to really offer ways of understanding how animals sense the worlds, which for many of us are hidden. because we limit what an animal might experience to our ways of being in the world, and how to think of the interaction more as a form of interbeing. And to also challenge ourselves to try to not only think about, okay, this is how a shrimp experiences the world, this is how a mushroom experiences their world, but to again recognize the value of awe, the recognize of allowing ourselves to become curious and be surprised, and to bring that to our design experiences. So for me, this is something that Annan has been doing so beautifully. And I have to say that Annan is not even giving himself enough credit. The session that he talked about at the zoo that we had at the ASC meeting last year, through the wonders of the American visa process, Annan was not able to be there in person. So our interaction with Annan was also with mobile phones, and the idea of what is it like to walk through a zoo with another who's there virtually, allowing us to experience the various soundscapes, smellscapes, touchscapes of something like a zoo, where the creatures are trapped, but then maybe so were we trapped as we were walking through, trapped in our own ways of experiencing. So thank you, Annan, for opening up space for thinking about these questions.
Thank you so much, Fred and Claudia. And thank you, Fred, for mentioning based on Ed Yong's work, like all those sensories that our humans have are definitely not the entirety of all the senses that exist.
I'll be in a meeting for about an
But then a key question for me raised from Ed Yong's theory is that like there are so many other senses, like some fish can sense in the electronic field, but the humans can never have that kind of ability. It's just based on our biological nature. Then it means that there's always this kind of lack of ability to sense all the other beings, and we are using our human tools, like the measurements and the human constructs, like mathematics and chemistry and biology to measure those senses. But then would that sort of inevitably go back to the human sense if we are using the human tools? And so that's also the question of the human world, or human world. Can human cognition sensitivity truly perceive and meaningfully engage with those non-human life forms? And also, to what extent do you think are they necessary or even desirable?
Yeah. Maybe I can respond to this. I think what I was trying to point out is that there's a general condition of uncertainty, and it doesn't only emerge in the encounter between us humans and animals, the animal kingdom. It emerges in many contexts, even between us, because I cannot be sure whether I understand you, and nevertheless we can communicate. Now we can assume we have, somewhat similar bodies, but is that really, is that assumption already a kind of bias? I cannot really know how you feel in your body, it might be very different. So for me, really, this like being in uncertainty, that is a general condition. And I don't think that we can. Subjectivity is the basis for all understanding. If I take that position, there are things to know in scientific terms, and von Förster would call that is what is decidable. What I can describe in scientific terms These are normally decidable things. And then there are things that we can engage with. And that's what von Förster would call undecidable, but to be decided. And these are the interesting things. And empathy for me is what arises from the embrace of uncertainty, what is to be decided. And thinking with uncertainty is an ethical position, also to be decided. With that, I hand over to Fred.
Yeah, well, just to build on the conversation, like how we think about, since we're, how we think about empathy, even how we talk about how we think about empathy, the idea that it's thinking about rather than it. This is one of the things, again, that Annan and Claudia, both of your work for me opens up, is that it's much more of an enacted process, much more of an embodied process, and also more of a reciprocal process, that we are needed to understand how our sensing another creature is also affecting how we are seeing ourselves and being seen by the other. But that this is necessarily an ongoing process, and how that shows up so importantly in design, because we may be, we may be trapped. It's a trap that we create for ourselves in terms of thinking, okay, now I experience, this is what the world of my dog is actually experiencing. So I know that when I throw a stick, I know that the dog isn't seeing the stick, the dog is going on the smell of my hands. Okay, solve that problem. But we need to allow ourselves to see this as an ongoing process. And I think that's what your work, both of your work, opens up to.
Yes, exactly. So I totally agree with the concept of uncertainty, because in terms of design, like architecture specifically, it's always about designing for the uncertainty. Like when designing for humans, we're trying to limit this uncertainty to the minimum to ensure safety and to fulfill fire regulations, for example. But then when designing for more than humans, this kind of uncertainty is really really difficult, since like you can never define their needs or the like what kind of situations all those different species would live in. And but then I don't think this kind of problem is actually should actually stop us from making this attempt. Like as a starting point, I feel like even though we can probably never be able to design to attempt all the uncertainties, this process of trying to understand and trying to care for those more than human entities is a process of training our own somatic abilities. It's a process of trying to learn to be more patient and more welcoming, and trying to be able to acknowledge that there are things that we cannot control, and that's the definition to me what bravery is. And so a lot of stuff that's happening in the built environment, like in architecture, are probably not because the architects are brave enough, and it's simply a problem or like a choice of trying to embrace this uncertainty, or trying to make peace of it, or just to run away from it. And then in terms of this kind of phonological approach, as Fred mentioned, that there probably should be something more than the landscape, such as the touchscape, the smellscape. And this really, to me, touches upon the concepts of phenomenology, like it's the senses of the humans, like all the senses of humans that are important in creating a space. But then there's this kind of new trend, not so new, but like there's this concept of post-phenomenology. So like in the work of the late phenomenologists like Jean-Luc Marion, the givenness of the world is understood as preceding the intentional subject, instead of the subject constituting meaning through intentional acts of consciousness. Mariam, he shifts the focus to how the world is given, possessing a form of material immanence that exists independently of subjective interpretation. According to him, givenness alone is absolute free and without condition, precisely because it gives. In this kind of view, the subject sort of emerges as an outcome of the givenness, not its origin. And the world in its absolute and anonymous givenness takes precedence, and it's over intentionality or subjective sense making. But then this kind of rethinking of the subject sort of raises a new question: where does it leave us? So, like, if the subject is understood as an appearing with that emerges through its embodied relations with other bodies and objects, what is the role or position of our human subjectivity in this kind of intersubjective relations? And what role does it play when human subjectivity is no longer central or foundational, but instead part of a relational web? And also, given that the subject has been decentered by the primary of givenness, how can we account for the intersubjective when the subject is no longer foundational? And so basically, to you, how would you like proceed our subjectivity in this kind of interconnected relations? What do you think the role of our human subjectivity can still play?
Fred, do you want to go?
Well, just one other thing to build in, because for me, another aspect of what you're bringing in on is that we tend to, I mean, including myself in the world of designers, right? We tend as designers to approach things in a very techno-rational way in terms of how we see the world and how we think about what possibilities we're bringing forth. And the world doesn't necessarily work that way. So how to even open up space for the unanticipated, the non-rational? You know, what would rationality to a mushroom be like, for example, and asking ourselves that question. I mean, it has, what you're offering, and also has, I think, huge implications for design education, as well as cybernetic education.
Yeah, maybe I bring in, I see here a question from Mark in the chat, and he asks, isn't it possible to behave empathically in a reciprocal way without being able to confirm a shared concept of empathy? And that's, I think, what I was trying to allude to earlier on. We do not need this, we don't need to have a confirmation that we understand the other, or to whom we act empathically. We don't need that confirmation that we have a correct understanding or something like that. It's something that it's a position. I still think is something we have to decide. It's not, there's no way someone else is going to decide this for us. It's something that we can discuss, but we will never, I don't think we will ever have access to this kind of confirmation that would kind of build the ground for saying, okay, we need to, be good to these and good to this, but not so good to, I mean, so there will not be that confirmation. So it's something that we need to discuss and decide.
Yeah, just to build on that, Claudia, and I'm interested in hearing others. I'm sure there's a fantastic, I'm not looking at the chat right now. I'm sure there's a fantastic conversation also going on in the chat. But the sort of recognizing the paradox that's implicit in, or explicit actually, in what you're saying, that we hold to the idea in order to interact, for you and I right now, that we are operating out of the same frame, right? But at the same time that we're not. And we have to be open to the possibility that the shared understanding that we have, that is, for example, the result of a mutual empathy, is not there. So we have to both assume that it's there and assume that it's not there at the same time to be able to recognize, I realize, Claudia, that when you talk about empathy, I'm talking about something different, but it took me a while to get to that, right? But we had to have this sort of empathic understanding to even be talking with each other in the first place. So, and I think that's also at the heart of what, Annan, you're trying to do in terms of more than human design, is recognize the importance of paradox in this and opening up to the worlds of others. At the same time, you're opening up to recognition that, well, you're never going to fully do. So maybe the difficulty is the word confirmation itself.
Yeah, speaking of confirmation, or like pretty much the source of empathy, because like if we follow this kind of idea from Gregory Bateson, like the mind is not located within individual, but also a pattern of relations between organisms and environment. Like, is empathy still possible? Like, if we are sort of in a all like interconnected system and always co-emerging with each other, can empathy still exist? Because like if there's no self-other distinction at all, and can empathy also be understood not as a fixed state, but as like a recursive process of becoming with? So like in our conversations, when we both acknowledge that empathy is a paradox, like if we don't know if actually it's there yet, what's sort of like what kind of definition would you give to empathy? And like in this kind of system, do you think it can ever be truly existent?
But so the dissolution of binary logic, of the distinction between subject-object, this dissolution does not necessarily entail a dissolution of difference. That's important. You don't, but it's a different logic. So, but I in our document, I was thinking a little bit, I have a little bit trouble with the post-phenomenologists because I think they tend to be, they look to me like they have an underlying realism that I have a lot of difficulties with. So for me, I think the mystics are probably, for me, easier to kind of use as a pathway to think through something, like Bateson in some way is a mystic, you could say, but you could also, Martin Buber has created this kind of, the moment you turn the it into a you, the relationship totally changes, So it's about the quality of relations, and it's not about the dissolution of difference. So now we can create, when we co-evolve, I am like I human, you tree. That would be a new pronoun in a way, maybe. Maybe these pronouns would become very long. So I think it's about thinking in a different logic. Lived experience living is not necessarily binary logic. I think we have some questions. Should we maybe, so now it's about an hour. We have half an hour left. So should we maybe open to audience?
Yeah, I'm curious to know what Marie's question is,
Yes.
since Marie has her hand up. Yeah.
Please, Marie.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for a great lecture, Anna. It was very inspiring. I'm just wondering, now you are planning to do your PhD. What are the plans with this research after you finish your PhD? How are you going to apply this research to practice, or is that an aim, or you will just become an academician and be okay, or what is the goal?
Oh, thank you. It's like, well, I feel like design or research for me cannot be separated. I feel like they are just this two sides of the same problem. And so before my PhD, like this year, I will try to get qualified as an architect. And so with that qualification, hopefully I will be able to open up my own studio and design my own projects. And during my PhD, hopefully I will be able to already start doing that, like small scale installations or like the more than human designs, and then starting from this kind of like domestic structures, and then probably after PhD, I'm hoping to make it like larger to maybe like building scale, even landscape scale. But yeah, like I'm really greedy, like in a way, I really want to continue the architect path, but also want to do research. So yeah, but like yeah, 5 years still seem quite far away for me. I'm just that's just like a vision, but hopefully I can still be able to always do both of these things.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I'm looking forward to see some more results.
So great. So I think I'm not sure whether I see the hands in order, but I think so. Alexander Laszlo, please.
Thank you so much. I can put my hand down now. Thank you. And I'm delighted by this conversation. It's bringing up a lot of things that are not solely in the logical domain, but also exactly in that area of how to human well, that have to do with the heart space, have to do with this, what is empathy altogether. I wanted to raise a couple of things that have come up as concerns, but perhaps just different ways of looking at things that I want to share with you. Subjectivity, right? And we were talking, what is intersubjectivity? How does that stand? And I think it really depends on our definition of self. We could, and our level of system engagement. So if I say myself is as this human being, and I'm looking at it from the perspective of my humanness, then I can think of that other being over there. But I can also think at the level of my internal beings. So we all know that there are many microbes living within us. There are also there are 11 subsystems in terms of the respiratory system, the skeletal system. Can I have empathy with those things? There's the autonomic nervous system, which seems to be a being of its own, right? It's doing the digestion and other things. That can I have empathy at the subsystem level? And if I have empathy at the suprasystem level, okay, now I'm looking out to other beings. How does that mean that perhaps there's a larger sense of self? Wendy Wheeler has written in biosemiotics and the whole creature about this notion of the whole larger beings that have their own entity intelligence. Biokomolafe also talks about intra-being, where the base is not that we're separate. The base is that we are connected. To begin with, we are part of a larger intra-being. And so I'm thinking about that in terms of Michael Hall here also made some comments along these lines in terms of how we can already assume ourselves to be empathizing with ourselves as a larger being as the state point of departure. So again, it depends, I think, on the system level that we're looking at. Are we looking at subsystems, as suprasystems, or are we part of the suprasystem itself? Then the two, very quickly, just to mention other things so other people can say some things too. I think also this has to do with, Claudia, you talked often about our different types of logic. Is it really logic? I'm wondering, because I know there is the difference between sensed engagement, the intuition, the role of intuition, and the known engagement with the role of cognition. I'm just thinking of Whitehead's notion of prehension. And the prehensive engagement is not a matter of logical engagement. It's a precognitive engagement. And that involves the intuition and the sense of something else being here. So this last thing leads me to the question about empathy only with life. Can we not empathize with a stone? And what about empathizing with Gaia or with something much more? So again, these are these are other questions that are coming up in this wonderful discussion. So thank you very much for stimulating me along these lines.
Thank you. I could maybe say that just quickly so logic, when I use it as like not non-binary, that would also mean for me that we kind of leave that idea of logos. So it may well include things that cannot be described through that idea. Yeah, so very quickly, but maybe, I don't know. So should we, Fred, you want to say something? Should we move on?
Yeah, no, let's go to, I think Sophia has her hand up.
Yeah. Your sound doesn't seem to work. Still not working. But since we're ready, we just wait until your sound works. But maybe in that time we can also
My hand up.
yeah, now, yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Now it's gone again. There's probably and maybe you pull the plug.
The volume was really soft.
Yeah.
But I can empathize
hear
with
me?
your situation.
Right, exactly. I mean, this is an illustration
Yes,
of how
okay.
can we understand what your experience is like,
Let's see, I
Sophia, to
can't
try
hear
to
you.
help. It could be your volume is not
Okay,
turned
now
up.
I can hear you. Okay.
Yeah. It's the headphones. It's always the headphones.
It drives me crazy. So, thank you so much for your talk and for this wonderful connection with our living and non-living world and cybernetics. I got my PhD in Japan, where I suppose Jewel has studied and may be studying still at Kyoto University, maybe? I don't know.
No, I was doing a
I
field
haven't
work.
checked.
But it's my field work assignment.
Okay. Well, I teach 70 students every year for several years now at the same university I got my PhD at. I got my PhD in how we can use ethnobotanical plants in the landscape to create a positive flow in the social ecological system. And when I teach my students, it's actually supposed to be an English class, but I don't do English classes. I don't believe in them. And what I teach my students is not English, but how to understand other perspectives and the other parts of the world, because Japanese are so they have a xenophobic and a very closed perspective as far as their own culture. And so what I try to do is help them to understand other cultures and perspectives, and in particular, other than human creatures and living beings and systems, because without this understanding, they can't properly design landscapes. And so I'm teaching all landscape students, and it's a required course. And I teach all of the third grade students in the Department of Horticulture at Chiba University. It's very exciting. And I really enjoy how they open up to this, especially when I connect them with their own traditional culture. And I'd like to know from you, Zuo, and perhaps from you also, Claudia, your own ways of allowing the other than human, or those beings that we cannot understand, or those things that we cannot understand, to participate in our designs. Do you have any like examples or things that you think are special to your particular way of thought and your hearts that you can share with us that might help us to understand how we can connect more deeply from a different perspective?
Yeah, thank you. So based on my knowledge and fieldwork in Kyoto, so like the starting point of my project was landscape recovery, and there is this kind of phenomenon of sort of environmentalism in the most in landscape recovery or rewilding projects, both in the West and in Japan, and in like sort of contrarily in the traditional Japanese culture, people are sort of like there is no distinction between what's cultural and what's natural, and it's fun sort of there's a foundation of Shintoism, and also this sort of animistic worldview of all the animals and trees and landscapes are also part of the cultural life. And so I feel like in tradition, sort of there is already this kind of really strong connection of people and their natural landscapes in the Japanese culture. But on the other hand, I feel like it's somehow somewhat also like over humanization of nature. So like since there is no distinction at all, since in the Japanese culture people are nature, there's also sort of this kind of extreme ideology like uh, like building like gigantic dams and to stop the ocean, and this kind of infrastructure projects that are kind of destructive to nature. So I feel like there always needs to be like a balance in terms of this over-humanization of nature and extreme environmentalism that pretty much leaves us to do nothing to nature. That's why the idea of care in my project comes from. So like for me, it's always about the right distance. So you, in a way, you can't be sort of rejecting all the natural process, but then on the other hand, you can't sort of take over entirely. And sort of the nice gesture is to, for me, is probably be like a gardener, like in the Japanese gardens, like the gardeners would help the trees grow, but then they wouldn't interfere the natural process too much. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I've been based in China for some time, so, and I do teach philosophy of art. So one of the first things one can see when one opens these old traditional painting manuals is that stones obviously need to be painted alive. They need to be as if alive. So stones are not necessarily considered to be dead, like in Western culture. And I think there's something that Annan just alluded to, that there is not necessarily this dichotomy between culture and nature. There is actually not that dichotomy, but there are problems arising from the complete resolution of that difference as well, as he pointed out. So it's still something to be discussed. But yeah, maybe we move on, Jude.
Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you. This is really interesting. Unmute. You have to unmute me, somebody.
No, it's good.
Okay. This is very interesting, and I can totally relate as it relates to being a bee steward. And how I am always interested in figuring out ways where I can communicate with the honeybee in ways that recognize maybe their natural ways of being, and how the apiary, the space in which the hives live, can reflect that. Annetta Pedretti was a beekeeper or a bee steward. And that's another thing, this whole idea of logics and language and, Maturana said, creatures don't design anything, humans do. But design is something that he considered to be a human. Creatures do the only thing they can in their living in the present. But this thing of language that we've lived in for millions of years seems to allow us to do these other things, like talk about what we're talking about now. That separates us from that natural way of being in the world. So I find this very interesting. And the idea of empathy and so sympathy is when I can totally relate to you. Empathy is when I can act as if. Never forgetting, Rogers said, never forgetting the as if. And I think that's very, very important that we not forget the as if. And also going back to Maturana and the idea that all living systems live in a relational space. Annan, you made reference to the relational space of humanness, Bateson's mind, where is mind, in the relational space where organism and environment intersect. Maturana talks about, as observers, we can see and we observe and we make distinctions about that emotioning that we then call feelings. Like empathy is a feeling. And it's a way of being with the other. And one other thing I did want to say that again, I mean, and Maria can relate, because we're actually looking at honeybees and natures and the arcs of whatever it's called right now. So this is really, really intriguing to hear you speak about this, all of you. I forgot the other thing I wanted to say, but and then that last statement you made, Sophia, it articulates it so well. The idea that how do we open space for bees? For me, it's bees to help me formulate my design of their space. How do I open space for the bees to help me formulate my design of the apiary? And I'm always like paying attention. I mean, like this morning, I went to the farmer's market on my little moped, and I went to get on my moped to come home, and one of my fellow bee stewards was there, and there was a bee hanging out on my moped. And I said, Justina, come here. And there it was. And she saw it too, and she took a picture of it. And it was like, we decided, well, maybe there's a little honey on there from something I transported something. But just, and I call that bee magic. So I find that being one with the bees just opens up this incredible space in my understanding and relating to nature and being with nature that I wouldn't ever have come to otherwise. So again, thanks a lot.
Thank you,
Bravo.
Jude. Thank you, Jude. Yeah,
So
I don't know
question.
how important it is that we maintain. There seems to be something at the basis that is very important. This kind of sense of wonder. If you give it up, probably you cannot. Then empathy is gone too. I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question, Claudia and Annan. Sorry, I'm not raising my hand. But based on Jude's comment and also Alexandra's comment earlier, and that is that, if we're designing with nature, with interspecies, we make assumptions. We need to in order to do our design work. And what happens when the others that we're designing with what we might say misbehave, when the bee doesn't do what we thought it should do? Or in the case for the examples that I was giving from the Science Center, the children misbehave. They do the things that they get it wrong. And how do we see that as an opportunity to learn about ourselves as well as learn about our own ideas of design and other species?
I think it's important. I like it every time someone does something I didn't expect. It's great. Because, it's not about you know, design makes only suggestions for how things can be used. And if someone finds another way of doing something with it, that's fantastic, you know. That means it's open.
Yeah, I also feel like definitely architecture design, spatial design is not just about the architect's ego. Like the output of the project, the space that's designed by the architect or the client shouldn't just be a celebration of their own artistic creation. It's like it's always a live space, and there should always be room for the expected. And I personally would always try to jump the fences and stuff. Obviously, it's not following the rules, but like it's my way of exploring the space and trying to see what's not being designed and what can be done. Yeah, I feel like it's for the children or for the beats, it's also for them to see all the possibilities. And for designers, it's like a loop of information that can also be used to better the designs.
Should we hand over to Mark?
Yeah.
So I'm interested in the nature of empathy in relation to interacting both with other species and non-human species. So for instance, there's been some recent work with AI that allows people to create sounds that whales seem to respond to as intelligible, and that leads to changes in their behavior. And then there are also some scientists who did some research on glaciers when they're doing what's called calving, which is when the glacier breaks off, but it turns out that there's an acoustic signature to each of those actions. And so they can tell by listening to the sound whether the glacier is breaking underwater or above water or both. So I wonder where I'm going with this is I think there might be something that's more behavioral about empathy, and or at least is connected to behavior and action and doing. And then it might be, I'm not sure how to connect it with the conceptual and the language.
When there is, so from my point of view, I think I alluded to this earlier on. The moment you are in a landscape of uncertainty, and what is left, if there's not knowing, then is engagement. That is, you know, we still can engage even if we don't know. And that is a way of learning.
I like that.
I pass on. Fred.
Well, I was going to, we have a couple of questions still. So, Michael? But no, I mean, as a transition, I totally agree with you that sort of recognizing the ongoing process, right?
It was a rather short answer, so I thought maybe you can add something.
Well, yeah, so my way of continuing would be to say that we need to be open to learning by getting it wrong and trying things and to be open to learning about our own learning process. Maybe, yeah. We did this just as a quick thing. One of my favorite stories was when we were designing this exhibit at the Science Center. It's an exhibit that many science centers have, and it was the Bernoulli blowers, which is supposed to teach kids about aerodynamics. And it's essentially a huge hair dryer and a beach ball. Right? And what happened this time when I don't know, 7-year-old girl came in, took the beach ball, threw it away, and tried to stuff her teddy bear into the hair dryer. And this is a wonderful, and the people on the floor were saying, no, they're going to break the exhibit. rather than seeing this as an opportunity to think about what did the exhibit itself invite, and how might the learning that the youth and their family were doing might also teach us. And this is what I meant by, you could say that they were misbehaving. On the other hand, maybe we were misbehaving by assuming that people had to follow the rather limited directions that we were giving them. But I think this totally plays out with the work you're doing, Claudia, and the work that Annan is doing. Anyway, Michael, I invited you to say something, and then I
Yeah,
took
Michael.
over.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I totally can connect to that in view of the learning and unlearning. And it's a comment or question for Annan, and it has to do with Satoyama. So when we look at this, the Satoyama villages and how this fluent transition between culture and nature, where the stream is guided past the house through the kitchen, and they put the dirty laundry in the river so it's cleaned by the fish and so on. It's mesmerizing. And it took me a long time to realize that what we see there, this perceived harmony of nature and culture and the people and the reciprocity between the animals and the humans, is actually a designed thing. And it took hundreds and hundreds of years and seasons for the people to understand the natural rhythms and the systems and networks and the patterns around them. And then it got better and better and better, and also became able to adapt. And so what looks like, so for me, the Satoyama is a masterclass in more than human design already, to be honest. What do you think about that, Annan?
Yes, I totally agree. Like all these kind of interconnected relations in the Satoyama landscape is like already quite like more than human already. But like what's sad is that most Satoyama landscapes are decaying because of population shrinkage and then people moving to the cities. So what I'm trying to do is sort of to find a way to sort of be more responsible to when people leave, so that when this kind of traditional farmlands and coppice fields and forests, when they lack human intervention, they will kind of die out quite soon, and it's really difficult for nature to recover, since traditionally for hundreds of years there's always human to help. And so I was really trying to look at how this process of decaying can be reverted or even converted into something else, based on this kind of past knowledge.
I see. Thank you.
We see it in ancient Chinese philosophy, this relationship between the person who looks into the landscape is not independent of the landscape. It's always already circular. So it's very similar, actually, how we conceive these kind of relationships in cybernetics. It's always co-evolving. Who looks into the landscape co-evolves with landscape, and so it's this exchange. Jerry.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the very informative and pleasing thoughts that you brought to mind this morning. I really would like to pursue something that comes from a slightly different angle in terms of the relationship between semiotics and semiosis, and how that is arranged in our cognitive facilities in terms of the ecosystem and where we're at. In this context, I see some creative tensions between Claudia's presentation and Annan's presentation in the following sense, and that is the distinction between intersubjectivity and interpretativity, where I then consider this in terms of Kantian a priori versus Kantian a posteriori. And I'm somewhat puzzled by how this conundrum could be resolved.
Hmm. Probably not with Kant. So the reason is because the way Kant assumed this kind of for example, in Kant's conception of art, this way of bringing the order of the world or the knowledge of the world to human beings was always with this kind of exceptional human, a genius who's kind of the super sensitive and has kind of access to this order of the world, and then kind of brings this into the art, and this is the mediator. And so the problem with that construct is that there is an assumption of a correlation, and it doesn't really work for me. I think we have to kind of and I think we can do it when we return. If we go to a Chinese point of view, we don't actually need. We don't need that mediator, because we are in the world. We don't that knowledge is already in the world. It's not somehow outside.
And then?
Yes, I totally agree with Claudia. Like Kant's idea of this kind of genius that has access to these ideas, it's kind of not applicable now, and also in the Chinese or Japanese tradition, like artist is not something that like inheritance or like given by God. It's something through practice. And for me, this notion of practice and hardship is really important in concepts also like empathy, because empathy is not something that's given to us. It's always cultivated through our lives, and it's always cultivated through our relations with others, and it's always a learning process. So I think whether we are able to interpret the worlds of other beings, or like to understand them or to design them, like the ultimate goal is sort of not as important as a process of trying to learn this process. Like to me, like this process of training our empathy is much more important than the result. And yeah, yeah, I also feel like the ideas of sensitivity and care and responsibilities, they also it's also a trend ability, and they sort of provide us an opportunity to become more than ourselves.
So I think it's helpful. I think both the answers are helpful to me. I guess the issues that come up in my own mind are the cognitive, if you would, cognitive equilibrium between the a priori and the a posteriori, and how that shapes our views.
Yeah, maybe we have to pass on this for now, but
Yeah.
we can think about it for next time.
So one connection for me, and maybe back to Annan, because this session is framed as new voices, and I'm not a new voice. You are a new voice with this audience. But just because you're also, and this, Jerry, your question invites this for me also, that back to the idea of biosemiotics. And when we think about the semiosphere, the distinction between how much for humans, the symbolic is the world in which we live in. And for non-human species, maybe the iconic becomes more dominant. And what is the relation between the symbolic and the iconic? And we assume the symbolic's taking place. But it's really a wonderful question to think about going forward in terms of what are the signs and what counts as a sign for other creatures. But Annan, maybe you have some thoughts. Well, Claudia too, yeah.
I mean, Kant is not a very embodied thinker, you know, but we know that our experience of the world is, for example, a sense of agency. That's something that is prior to that is actually prior to reflection. There are studies about that because it's through the movement of the body, and I think in this brings us back maybe also to the some of the ideas Annan has mentioned in his presentation about how we act in the world with, you know, as embodied beings, and what that means, because it's not only a limit, it's also an opportunity. Yeah, luckily we have touch, maybe, you know. And
yes,
sense of
and
movement.
Yes, definitely. So, also going back to the idea of the symbolic, I think even if we are sort of embracing the idea of the entirety of the biosemiotic domain, it's still crucial to sort of memorize those symbolic notions of humans, because like for me, they are like the conveyors of memory and histories of this kind of passed down continuity of the human culture. And that's exactly what we sort of base upon when we try to understand the semiotics of other than human beings. And so also I totally agree with Claudia that through this embodied notion of bodily movement and not only just through culture like as an abstract construct, but also through engaging and acting upon and designing and care for and taking responsibilities for.
Yeah, so Sebastian brings up Robin Kimmerer, which is obviously we can always go into the indigenous writings. We have a lot to learn from them. I often feel they know a lot more, and we have definitely not read enough. But supposedly we are at the end of the session, already 8 minutes over. So should we have any final words? No, you get the big screen, Annan.
Okay. Well, just want to say a massive thank you for everyone, for Claudia and Fred, and for everyone who contributed to this. Like in the beginning, I was feeling so very nervous because like I don't have much in my pocket to present, but then it's also definitely a process for me to learn since I'm about to start my PhD, and this session has tremendously helped me a lot with the preparation stage and all the questions and discussions. And yeah, just thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Annan, for actually, I mean, it was like, you know, I and Fred were supposed to host us. It feels a little bit more like you have hosted us. But yeah, thanks so much for all your preparations also.